I don't understand this thing. Like, I love work. I mean, I think art is eternal in a certain way, right? But there's nothing really eternal except our relationship with other people,
Absolutely.
right?
I'm
Sure.
sitting here looking at a beautiful hardcover,
Oh, that's great.
and I read my copy on, I think you sent me an advanced PDF or something because I read it online. I've got all my quotes ready, but I've got all my notes there.
Sure.
Usually I would have all the pieces of paper stuck in here and would impress you with how well I know your book, but I actually do. So,
That's great. You're one of about five people who think has read it so carefully already.
well, I've read the book so carefully that well, this hardcover copy I stole
Mhm.
from my wife's bedside table
Huh.
because I've got it next to her to read. And it's her next book after reading Women of the Renaissance, which she's two-thirds of the way through.
Oh,
And I tried to book that author from Scotland. She teaches at Edinburgh University, and she didn't get back to me. So we're going to have to find a way to get her. And then also the next one I have here is, and this one is the way I usually read it, just to show you. I've got Brad Wilcox on next week,
oh, that's great.
and look at all the notes I've got in there. And
That's,
that's how your book is actually. Your book is even more notated than that, except it's all here, and I'll show
that's
you in a
great.
minute.
Oh, that's great. I'd love a picture of that.
Of what?
A picture of your book all marked up.
Your book or his book
Yeah.
all
No,
marked
no,
up?
my book all marked up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll do better than that. If my next book ever gets published, I've got, and you type in Pakaluk and start doing a search, and it's you pop up all through because I read it just when I was writing something, and you've had a big impact on my own work.
Oh, thank you. That's great
Yeah,
to
and even worse, I also cite
hear.
your paper you gave about marriagelessness,
Oh, yeah.
that college thing. So basically, it's Pakaluk all the way down here. We've been wading in your material.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I've been in the cave working on this for 5 years. So,
Yeah,
um, coming out and discovering that, anybody anywhere finds this helpful or good, it's just
yeah.
so rewarding.
Well,
It's
thank the Wall Street Journal for sicking me on to you because that article got me going, and then I got in touch with you, and then it was like, okay, now we're
yeah.
off to the races. But
Yeah.
hey, I'm going to introduce you properly.
Okay. Okay.
This is Frank Schaeffer. I am Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and/or listening to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, which is a podcast which first goes live to YouTube, and we do Facebook, and then it goes to about a dozen sites, including places that do podcasts. And so please subscribe to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer at Apple Podcasts. And my Substack account, it has to be said, at frankschaeffer.substack.com. And I'm doing this all backwards because Catherine and I have already been talking. And so you're getting in on the middle of this conversation. But today we're talking about a lot of things. Her book, Hannah's Children, The Women Quietly Defying the Birth Dearth. This is the book. And I was explaining to Catherine that I did all my reading on my computer. So all my notes are in the computer. Usually I would have this book, as people who watch this, they'd know I'd actually prepare, and it's all annotated. Um, so first of all, thank you so much. And secondly, I really like the book a lot, and I like it on two levels. I like the book as a book, but I also like the fact that in all the gray sameness that we churn through, where everybody's in a nice little pigeonhole, it's wonderful to discover you because you are something that we don't see these days anymore. And that is a truly countercultural figure. And um, I was joking with Catherine when we were here a minute ago, just talking, that when you find out that she's had 8 children and you look at her, that she must have a sort of a body double working for her because this is a mother of 8 and she looks like she's 12, which is crazy. But in addition to which, I find that your book, which I'm going to talk about in a second here, is just stunning in that in the beginning of the book and throughout the book, and then especially at the end of the book, you make this case for women who want more than the 1.7 children that falls below the replacement level and who had bigger families. And so in Hannah and Her Children, basically the way this book works is there's an introductory chapter and an ending, and then a philosophy of life throughout the book. But correct me if I'm wrong, I think you interviewed 50 women.
Mm-hmm.
And the entrance fee was that they have to be educated and have 5 children or more.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very amazing group. It's sort of self-selecting women who are PhDs and professors.
Mm-hmm.
Catherine is a university professor, and now I'm going to read the stuff I was supposed to read at the beginning. Catherine Ruth Pakaluk,
Mm-hmm.
associate professor and author of Hannah's Children, The Women Quietly Defying the Birth Dearth. You are a professor at Catholic University of America, which is in Washington, D.C. Your husband is also a university professor. You teach, I believe, economics.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to doing all that, you are all kinds of other things. And I'm going actually to my manuscript here, Catherine, to read some things I wrote about you. And the first thing I said is Catherine Ruth Pakaluk is not a panda. And why do I say that? Because I have a little passage before talking about the fact that pandas don't know how to mate very well. They don't have very many babies, and we're all turning into pandas because our countries like France and North Korea and Italy and the United States and Japan tend to fall below even replacement levels. We're having so few children. And you went off and had 8 children. You're a university professor of economics and a feminist in this countercultural sense of you're all about women and women's rights and women's choices.
Mm-hmm.
It's just you're making a very different set of choices than the women you read about in the New Yorker or the Guardian. Kind of a good, well-kept secret that you're now exposing through Hannah's Children because of all the women you're interviewing. Your version of feminism is a many-child version bolstered by your Roman Catholic faith and based on what I regard as your egalitarian, enlightened, fall-in-love partnership that you share with your husband. He's a university professor.
Mm-hmm.
He also is not a panda, has lots of kids.
Mm-hmm.
But the kind of feminism you represent is sort of out of fashion right now in the sense that a lot of what people think of when they hear the word feminism is a sort of a 1970s derivative, one-note feminism that basically is concerned with career. Now, you have an incredible career. You're a PhD university professor. You did your doctoral work at Harvard. You're a frequent speaker on culture and gender, social science, vocations of women, and the work of Edith Stein. In addition to which, I said it before, and then I'm going to stop talking. I find you refreshingly countercultural. You're sort of a, hey, you got a problem with this sort of person, as in, here you are, you're doing your thing, you're bucking at the antenatal trend set in motion by kind of a faux feminism of the 1970s, early 60s, 1970s. And I'll just finish by saying that I think a lot of the feminists from that era were noble in the sense that they were fighting for reforms they honestly hope would transform marriage, work, and domestic life. But too often what they transformed was entry into a male-shaped system of jobs and career that neglected the desire of both women and men to have families. And that's sort of you. And I think your work is incredibly important. And I love the book. We'll talk about that. I also love the paper I saw you delivering on YouTube and then got you to send me a copy of. Full disclosure, we've had one conversation, just you and me talking, FaceTime, and you're talking to a huge fan.
Well, thank you so much.
There you go.
I should travel with you. You should give all of my openings.
I think I could open for you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you're up in New England, and I've got lots of family up there. We spent a lot of our years up there, so it'd be great to see you in person at some point.
Well, I hope you come by because the invitation's open, and Jeannie's reading your book and loves it too. So
delightful.
We're both good
I'll
cooks.
do that. Yeah. Yeah, no, you're not wrong about this kind of other breed of feminism. At the moment we're kind of living through this era where the term is being renegotiated on both sides in a sense. So, I mean, so all of the things that you mentioned are worth talking about in all of their dimensions. And I feel that there's not a political or ideological home for what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
I hear it from some of the younger men and women. I guess I'll say that on the putative right, who are interested in family and rejecting a certain tired breed of feminism. They look
Yeah.
at me and say, well, shouldn't we tell people to stop going to graduate school? Shouldn't we tell women to, stop doing what you're doing? And I think, like, I don't think that's the answer. So right. So I don't really fit very well over there with the folks who want to dial back the things that I think have been so good, right? I think women going to school and developing themselves. I'm absolutely 100,000% in favor. So right. So all the things you mentioned are worth talking about.
And
And
you're a university professor, so
yeah, yeah,
you get up every morning and talk to
I
young
do.
women who want to go out
I
and quote do
do.
things.
I do. I have the best job in the world. I absolutely love it. And I think it's really, and we could talk about this too. I think working with university students for me, it's seamless with a life of
Mm,
being a mother. I leave my kids here and I drive in to see these other young people. So I think of them as really closely connected. And just like the best news in the world that as my own kids are leaving the house, I can look forward to a future of working with young people at
yeah.
the university.
Well,
Yeah.
people who follow me, and I'll just say this in
Hmm.
terms of this interview, because it's a good setup for you.
Hmm.
Um, Jeannie and I have been together 53 years, and we came at
Mm.
this. I know you sort of got married young too, but not
Yeah.
ridiculously young.
Yeah.
And everybody was betting against us, but we were really in love, and we were lucky enough to
Mm.
fall in love. And I got her pregnant in an evangelical right-wing fundamentalist community that frowned upon this, but they did one thing right. And that
Hmm.
is that they supported young mothers and they supported young couples. Whether we were married or not wouldn't have been the point. They actually were
Hmm.
genuinely Christian in their outlook on that aspect of things, although I disagree with so much of the way
Yeah.
I was raised since.
Yeah.
But we were very fortunate. And so let's go there first of all.
Sure. Yeah.
This is out of order, but
That's okay.
because of my own experience that really proved to Jeannie and me, the first 10 years of our lives, we were living very much helped by my parents in a free apartment in their basement. And then I was working with my dad. Aside from the fact I left all that, it worked out well for us. Let's get to the it takes a village aspect of this.
Hmm.
Because I think a theme that runs through the interviews you do with these women with 5 children or more, not to mention your own life, and not
Hmm.
to mention your views in your paper where you coin this term marriagelessness to describe where we are. I think part of this problem, referencing birth rates that don't even hit replacement levels, so many women in polls saying they're having less children than they thought they wanted, your own story, the women you're interviewing. Let's talk about the takes a village aspect that has evaporated in our culture and reasons for it, with people moving and putting jobs first and so on. But one last thing, since I do grandchild care every day with 3 of my
Hmm.
5 grandchildren living across the street, I'm always amazed what a big deal this is to the mothers and the parents that I meet who are picking up their children. And they find out that I put 15 years of invested of time into childcare,
Hmm.
and they're always saying to me, oh, they're so lucky to have you. And my viewpoint is, are you crazy? This is the only thing that I'm sure about that I've ever done in my life that's worked out well.
Hmm.
Everything else I have regrets and doubts about. I'm good at this and I love it. So that's part of the village too. How are all
Right.
these women you interviewed doing with so few villages around? Where have they found their villages? Where did you find yours? Now I really am going to shut up.
No, this is a great place to start. And I love the image you just presented of your own life. I think we discussed on the phone when we talked, my husband's mother, who is just shy of her 90th birthday, she lives with us in a basement apartment. There are windows. It's not as bad as it sounds. Um, and what a gift to us and to our children. But it's clear it goes both ways, right? So that's part of our village. She's lived with us for almost 10 years. First, she lived next door, and after her husband passed away, and now she lives in our home. And that's part of the village. But I'll get around to your question about the women I interviewed. Um, but I think 100% it's great to lead with this, right? This kind of Western thing. It just is fair to call it Western, of a kind of faux autonomy or a faux independence, right? Like that what it
Mhm.
means to kind of grow up is to, but there you are with Jeannie, like with your first baby coming and you're living with your parents, and did that make you not adults or something like that? I think a lot of people would think about it that way. But I think there's something deeply wrong with that. I think that could not be correct, right? That somehow we're more ourselves when we're kind of disconnected from other people. We're more adult when we're disconnected from people. Um, if it's okay, I'll tell you a funny story that maybe it's worth telling. When when we moved to the first sort of village-like place that we lived, this was about 10 years into our marriage. We moved to a small kind of new development town in South Florida, a little religious university where we first taught. And this was a new development. And so, kind of there's a university and these houses are all about, 400 feet from the university. And so everybody knows everybody. And everybody that worked at the university lived in your neighborhood. And it was a very strange experience, almost a kind of Truman Shows type experience. And it was sociologically very interesting to see what happened to people. So some people moved into this community and really just couldn't handle it, moved away. And what did they not like? They didn't like that, you went to the grocery store and you saw your colleagues from work at the grocery store. You got up in the morning to get the paper and your colleague from work was across the street or, out getting the paper too. So there's this really sense. I mean, if you wanted to have an affair, everybody would know it. It's sort of like, and it was the first time I thought, well, this is how human beings have always lived. I mean, there's something, obviously, it's kind of initially shocking and intrusive. But what happens next is exactly which friend and neighbor to call when your dishwasher is busted because there's no repair person that's going to come out and your neighbor. And that, so I saw that people either they found that repulsive and eventually found a way to get out. Like, this is not what I signed up for. Or they kind of leaned into it, after. And that was really interesting to me, just as a sociological experience. There's a lot of things that are unnatural about these planned communities. And so, I'm not endorsing them entirely. But that was right around the time that my husband's mother came to live with us. And I had moved down there from New England. And my experience of it was different. I mean, New England is different. It's, like you might live in a neighborhood where the houses are close together, but you may not necessarily find that you're going to know your neighbors very well. So that was amazing to me. I thought, well, this really makes the parent raising different. So the kids ran amok. The kids, basically you'd go, well, I don't know where they are, but there's another mother down the street and wherever they are, it's going to be fine. So that was interesting. So I'm just going to leave that there. You asked about the women in the book and where did they find their communities? I would say some of them had arrangements like the one that you now have, the one that I now have. But I would say most of them recounted stories of moving into a neighborhood because they'd been drawn to a church community. They'd been drawn to a church community. Maybe there was a charismatic pastor or rabbi and so they moved to live closer to where they could worship together as a family. And then they discovered, well, here's where these other people are. So, I mean, one lady in particular, Leah, she says, well, it's not good enough. She says in our church, they bring you meals. There are things like this support. It's not the whole village, but it's a piece of the village. And in particular, Mickey, one of the early chapters in the book, I mean, she describes having moved into this neighborhood because it was where they sent their kids to school, as religious school. And because of seeing the other women in the community where it was sort of normalized, she says that people had lots of kids, it made it like not as scary for her to think about. So I would say that the most common thing I found in my interviews was in this 21st century America was people finding a kind of a halfway to a village experience in a religious community, oftentimes attached to a school or a homeschool community.
Well, also and of course, a lot of these women are in some sort of religious community, and you didn't make a point of interviewing religious women. I remember reading one essay you directed me to when we were talking that was by what you call a very secularized person. But quite a few of them, whether they're Jewish or Christian, evangelical, or Roman Catholic, or other people, live in communities that are very deliberately kind of intentional. Religious community.
That's right. I heard expressions of, again, kind of like this is really good. It's what makes it work. Or
Mm,
maybe in many cases it's what inspired me or kind of made me think it was possible. I really love like Peter Berger's idea of the structures of plausibility, right? Like you don't
yeah,
know what's possible and then you see it and you think, well, I moved here because people said it was a great parish.
yeah.
But once I got here, I looked around and I thought, oh, you can do that? Like these
Mm,
other women are doing that. So it just opens up these structures. So yeah, but I definitely would like to say that, living in a great church community doesn't provide as much as what I think the richness we live with having mom in the basement,
mm.
or living across the street from your grandkids. I hope I could get your arrangement.
Yeah, but you've got to rephrase that. Stop
Yeah.
saying we having mom in the basement. You've got to say having mom living with us.
Having mom living with us. I know
Yeah,
it
like
sounds
I've got to
terrible. It
just
sounds
yeah
like this is
rewrite
like
that line.
I
Not
will fix that line. I
having
know.
mom in the basement.
Yeah,
Throw her a piece of meat once a week, and
like I said, it's a really lovely apartment with big windows and
I
um
believe it.
yeah,
It's
no,
not a
I love
basement.
it.
Hey,
You're right. You're 100% right.
yeah, when my son John, who served in the Marine Corps and fought in Afghanistan twice, came back at the
Mm,
beginning of that war in one piece, went off to the University of Chicago, graduated with honors, married Becky, came
yeah.
back. Becky and he wanted to have kids young in
Hmm.
fertility. Then she got her career going, but the couple of years they lived with us, now they've moved across the street. We were able to help with their child, and I got tennis elbow actually with my granddaughter
Hmm.
sleeping in my arms so much because she
Hmm.
loved to nap in my arms. But anyway, there was a bonding there between our
Yeah.
families, which you can't fake. In other words, visits
Yeah.
don't do it.
No.
When a young child's living in your home, it's a whole different deal.
Yeah. One thing that I want to mention in relation to this family living together thing is, I mean, you hear a lot of this today, I mean, people griping about the economy.
Yeah,
And there's plenty to gripe about. I mean, I'm an economist and I think there's lots of things we should gripe about with the
yeah,
economy. But you hear the following phrase, like the economy isn't working if people can't make it on one income by
sure.
themselves. And I don't know to what extent we should agree with that. I
Yeah,
mean, meaning like is the nature of life such that sort of it should be offered up to us in a way that we can sort of all live in these little enclaves all by ourselves. We
yeah,
have our 2,500 square feet
yeah.
up with nobody else. I'm not sure that's the ideal.
Well, I think a lot of the problem with these analyses of people and generational, you're worse off than your parents because we can't buy a house before we're
Yeah.
40, these kind of things overlook the fact that we have a kind of a historical amnesia to the point where we don't realize that when you're
Yeah.
driving by a family farm in Italy and you see that it has a
Yeah.
courtyard, the reason it does is because they kept building wings on the building
Yeah.
so that your kid could live with you.
Yeah.
When you look at hunter-gatherer societies in books like The Old Way by um, that I quote all the time by
Hmm.
Elizabeth Marshall Thomas, she lived with the Bushmen in the Kalahari in the 1950s. The idea of individual privacy or even individualism in those societies was not just anathema, it was a death wish.
Yes.
I mean, if
Yes.
you weren't pulling your weight in a family community village, literally going out and hunting and gathering,
Right.
you were dead. And there wasn't any male role or female role or hierarchy. The hierarchy
Yeah.
was finding the food. Old people were honored because they remembered where stuff was.
Right.
It was totally
Right.
intergenerational.
Yeah.
We're the freaks. This
Yes.
idea that you go off and live up by yourself. I mean,
Yeah.
whoever has done that in human history? Never.
Exactly. No, I think this is huge. I mean, in again in your neck of the woods, I mean, one thing that's charming about New England is all the triple deckers, right? The triple
Right,
decker
exactly.
homes. Why did we build triple deckers? I mean, well, we
Yeah,
were so poor, we just it was the best thing we could. Well, was the expectation was, you might have your sister upstairs and her husband and her
sure.
kids, and then, you know, I mean, and so I think you're right. We are the exceptions. And I
Yeah, I
think
mean,
go back.
individualism combined with sort of,
Yeah.
weird privacy ideas of like, oh, well, we don't want anybody around. I want to turn the page
Yeah.
here a little bit and go to the paper you wrote called Marriage,
Mhm.
Heroism, and National Greatness. And by the way, once
Mhm.
again, we're talking about Hannah's children, the women quietly defying the birth dearth. And quite seriously, I love this book. I just love the interviews, and I love just what it opens the door to in terms of human experience. Agree, disagree,
Mhm.
hate children, love children. You'll love this book, everybody, because it's just a fantastic slice of life that you're never going to see or read about anywhere except here, because other people aren't talking about this, but
Mhm.
Catherine is. Anyway, your paper Marriage, Heroism, and National Greatness that you delivered at Wheatley Roundtable on the Family at Brigham Young University in Provo, I think in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
You considered a whole range of questions and you kindly provided me the transcript. And I just want to quote a little bit from this. And you say the secret of living well, what the Christian tradition has called heroic virtue, is to live for another person or persons, not to live for the whole world, but for other, or for others in some vague sense, because others in a vague sense rarely make demands upon us and rarely require our sacrifices. We cannot live for everyone if we do not live first for someone, and this is precisely what is at stake when we consider the phenomena sociologists call, quote, the retreat from marriage, what I will call today marriagelessness. What is at stake is the loss of souls who become other regarding as a matter of habit. And this habit, this virtue, is the medium and long range outcome of a harrowing adventure and exacting training voluntarily taken on by young people who willingly tether themselves to the mast in pursuit of their Penelope, heroism of no small measure. So, you, besides the book, I guess the way I would put it this way, and besides the fact you're an economist, have become a sort of a philosopher of what I would call that you sort of allude to, the heroism of the marital relationship, in terms of it is the opposite of the me-ism and the selfishness of an individualism run wild. You talk about the heroism, and you even use very, 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 very unfashionable words like sacrifice in certain contexts. And I want to go to that, and then we will get back to the book. We're talking about Hannah's children. And let me just reintroduce you. Catherine is an associate professor, and she's author of Hannah's Children, The Women Quietly Defying the Birth Dearth. And you are listening to and or watching In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And would you go a little bit into your philosophy that you're talking about in terms of this heroic endeavor of living with someone and everything that entails in a world which is, all in sound bites and fast little cuts.
Yeah.
At the same time, so individualistic. It's a tough environment in which to try to connect with someone.
Yeah. I will. So, probably I thought a lot about this because I did get married younger than, like you said, not ridiculously young.
That's
But
me. I'm the
yeah,
ridiculously
you're
young guy.
ridiculously young. But young, I mean, I was a PhD student at Harvard at the time. And so from that, in that community, it was ridiculously young. Um, but I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I mean, people looked at me and said, "What are you doing? You're throwing your life away. Why would you do this now?" And I just thought, well, I mean, I love this person and this person seems like a gift to me. I remember thinking that. I remember thinking, well, if somebody's in your life that's a gift to you, it kind of demands a response. I mean, you don't get to sort of, hang around and kind of like keep that person waiting in the, I mean, what does that even mean? Like to wait in the wings. So I got married young and I thought a lot about it. And because of our circumstances, our marriage entailed a lot of, kind of strange things. I was raising children who had lost their mother. So I thought a lot about this, but I think one of the things that was most clear to me as a young woman, maybe I'm still young, a middle young woman now, but one of the things that was most clear to me when I was young was, gosh, how much you change. And that started and in fact, at that time, I was reading a lot of these Russian novels at the time. And I think in the piece you just quoted, I think I quote from Dostoevsky, this idea about loving humanity in general. He has that great quote, like, the more I love humanity in general, the less I can love my individual man. And I just thought, well, this is kind of the drama. Like the drama, I guess I look at it this way, is like that to tether yourself to another person is like this really hard thing to do. And the whole question is kind of how to work that out. Does it necessarily, I mean, it is going to feel like a loss. You'll lose a lot of things, freedom, whatever that is. But is there a way to think through that in which the self isn't lost, but somehow actualized or made better? And of course, I think in the tradition, that's what we tend to see. We tend to see these heroic poetry, this idea that like, well, is a battle dying young? Sorry, does a soldier dying young lose himself, or does he gain eternal glory or eternal?
mm,
praise. And of course, that's the whole idea. Like actually, it looks like a death, but it's not a death.
mm,
So it's not morbid. It's something else. It's like this possibility of life after death.
mm,
And I don't think you have to be Christian to buy that. I think it's deeply in the Christian tradition,
mm.
but I think it's really quite human.
Well, what's
But
interesting, just
yeah,
thinking about what you're saying, how in our contemporary culture, we don't even think about it when someone says that someone gave their life to become a great artist,
right,
writer.
right.
Um, you know, what's so interesting, I'll just give you a personal example. I get up every
Yeah.
day to write at 3 a.m. and I
Wow.
tell people that, and it's like, oh, yeah, that's what writers do.
Hmm. Yep.
The part they don't get is the reason I get up at 3 a.m. is because for the last 15 years I've been doing childcare and
Hmm.
I refuse to give up my writing and I
Yeah.
refuse to give up my childcare. So I made a quote sacrifice and just write earlier.
Yep.
But they get that. What they don't understand is why would a guy give up a writing, you know, in their view, do
Yep.
less speaking and less
Yep.
shit out there because you're doing all this stuff. They regard the art part as heroic. Oh, he
Right.
gets up early to write. They
Right.
regard the childcare part as, well, why would you do that? Can't they
Yeah.
hire a babysitter?
Right. I don't understand this thing. Like, I love work. I mean, I think art is eternal in a certain way, right? But there's nothing really eternal except our relationship with other people,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, I
And
mean, that's what your book is about. We're talking
yeah.
about Hannah's children, the women who quietly defying the birth dearth. Um, I was reading one of your interviews with someone, her name was Amanda, and she was talking very lyrically about just the joy she had.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I love about your book is it's not this happy clappy bullshit of joy without price.
Right.
These women are struggling,
Hmm.
but they're struggling for something. And I think the difference is this. I know a lot of women in business, and I've interviewed some here on my podcast, women who
Hmm.
are vice presidents of big corporations, very successful, run medical schools, and they do fantastic things.
Yeah.
Um, again, everyone understands when they sacrifice for that. But when somebody decides to have a number of kids and they do that, that sacrifice looks like a waste of time to people who are so career
Yeah.
oriented. We have a very
Yeah.
double standard. We talk about women's empowerment, but we have a very fixed, small idea of what that should be.
Hmm.
I just
Yeah.
want to talk about that a little bit because I think you
Right.
really nail it. And the way you nail it is um, you are not shy about talking about your own or their struggles and the
Hmm.
price they pay.
Hmm.
So you're not selling something.
Hmm.
You're saying, yeah, I'm selling you this car, and here's a list of all the problems that comes with it. And basically,
Right.
you got to be absolutely nuts to buy it. But if you
Yeah.
do, you're going to love it. It's
Yeah.
a really odd kind of thing. So to
Yeah.
go there a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, That's a great way to put it. Yeah, I guess I'm selling something. It's like a really painful car. No, I've sometimes likened it to kind of like running a marathon or the kind of thing that, you do have to want it to do this thing. But I do think that uh yeah, number one, um, this is not a topic, the topic of kind of like getting inside of the head and the heart of people dedicating their lives to raising children. This is not a topic. If you're going to do it at all, you can't do it lightly.
Mm,
I didn't want to do it lightly. Um, and part of this was like the sense that there's a story to tell. I mean, I say this in the first chapter. You get asked on the train, you get asked in the grocery store, how come you're doing this? And there just is no quick answer. It's a deep answer. And I did feel like there might be a thing to be done in trying to explain what that answer looks like for a lot of people. Um, and so one of the reasons I wrote the book the way that I did, I really felt strongly that it was important to get the women's voices in there, meaning their actual words and
yeah,
testimony. By the way, it was really hard to write it that way. It would have been easier to try to come up with summaries or something like that. But I wanted,
sure.
because you do this every day, you converse with people. When you have a conversation with people, it's not linear. And so trying to reconstruct from those conversations something like a linear story
Mm,
was probably the hardest part. Um, but yeah, what I heard over and over was, and I kind of divided it this way. people got started having children for whatever reasons they got started having children. And those reasons were typically related to some kind of inspiration or ideal, the ideal of marriage, or the ideal of it would be a beautiful thing to have a child, or
Mm,
the ideal of kind of a view of the universe. And so principles, different kinds of, I guess I would say idealism.
mm.
Um, but that isn't what kept them going, right? So very few of them said to me, "Oh, when I got married, I thought I'd like to have, 20 kids." Or when I thought I got,
Yeah.
I didn't get married thinking I
Seemed like
wanted
a
to have.
good idea at the time.
No, it seemed like a good idea. So it had something to do with this sort of pressing through to a place where there was a kind of, you've used the example of people making sacrifices for business. I also think the examples drawn from athleticism and athletic
Sure.
experience might be useful. The people who come back from Mount Everest, and they're so inspiring. And you go, well, I'm sure if I could get to that point, I would share that exhilaration, but I probably won't ever get there. And it had that kind of character. So like you set out on this journey because you think it would be great to be on the top of Mount
Mm.
Everest, or I don't know what, to climb a big mountain. But then there's some transformative thing that occurs somewhere along the way where they kind of go, well, I thought I was going to climb a mountain, but what I really did is discovered myself.
Yeah.
Right. And that was sort of the thing that I thought, oh, like that's deep. I don't know what that's all about.
Mhm.
So that was the goal, is to try to get that out, because that's what I kept hearing. Something gets you going, and it's a goal, it's an ideal, it's a commitment to a certain kind of excellence. And in athleticism, we know what that looks like. But then you discover like the real journey is this internal journey.
Yeah.
Um, and that's so interesting. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah,
So
and it
interesting.
has a very strange effect on other parts of your life. I've
Right,
noticed doing
right.
this childcare with Jeannie, that actually the sort of learning process that I had raising my own children, three children, and now these
Yeah.
five grandchildren I've helped with, three of whom are across the street. It's exactly what you're saying. And that is looking at it at the end of the day. I'm 71, so I'm getting closer to a lot of end of days stuff for me.
Hmm.
You realize that what was really going on is that you were being transformed.
Right.
And that is the things you liked least about yourself going into your 50s,
Yeah.
having been very much of a careerist, are being ironed out. You always wanted to be a more selfless person, and there was no way to sort of act the part or do that.
Right.
Like athleticism, you become that by the training, and then you
Yeah.
wake up one morning and you can't live without it because you get that
Yeah.
big rush, as you're
Yeah.
running every morning or whatever it is. It really is like that. I want to go back to a point you raised in terms of why people have this compunction. I think
Hmm.
one of the reasons we're very unhappy today in our culture is that we've kind of told evolution to get lost. I'm not a Christian. I
Hmm.
came through that Christian background. I'm an atheist who
Yeah.
prays, so I'm sort of a Christian in a
Yeah.
weird way. But
Yeah.
that's a different discussion.
Sure.
But I really believe that, especially coming out of my own background,
Hmm.
and I think in terms of modern things today,
Hmm.
you really have to be delusional to discount the power of the evolutionary prime directives.
Hmm.
And one of
Yep.
them equates to the village, and that is the survival of the friendliest. If you can't cooperate, you are dead.
Yep. You're right.
And that's absolute law of hunter-gatherer society. You're dead, not
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
not liked, you're dead.
Yeah.
Your relationship with other people is the only thing that will keep you alive. If they don't
Right.
like you, they're not going to feed you.
Yeah.
If you don't cooperate with the people who live over the hill, you're all dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other big one is that if you look at our biology, I interviewed Kat Bohannon recently in her book about how, I'm reading off the subtitle here because I screw these
Hmm.
things up, how the female body drove 200 million years of evolution.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, what drove that 200 years of million years of evolution was not the imperative to get a corner office in the HR department.
Right.
The
Right.
powerful shit there is to
Yeah.
do with procreation,
Right.
child. And when you start denying that,
Yeah.
then all the polls read how unhappy everybody's getting because
Right.
basically you're saying, excuse the language, but you're telling
Yeah.
evolution to fuck off.
Yeah.
Well, you can't do that because it's you. You didn't
Right.
come from nowhere. And it's the same with if you don't have
Yeah.
relationships with people and you're saying
Right.
no to your desire to procreate, you say no to love because you're too busy getting your PhD. So why marry the guy now? Let's
Yeah.
put it off. And then he goes away.
Yeah.
You do that in all these areas of life. And at the end of the day, you wake up and you say, I'm lonely. What happened to my
Right.
life? I don't. And
Right.
I think one of the stupidities of our moment of history
Hmm.
is this ignoring of the prime directives of evolution.
Yeah.
So, we're into milk and, lactose intolerance and all this peripheral crap. How about
Right.
let's talk about basic shit like
Yeah.
make a baby,
Yeah.
fall in love,
Right.
stay with somebody, live in a
Yeah.
village, help the guy next door. This is ingrained. And I'll go
Yeah.
one step further and throw it back to you as a Roman
Hmm.
Catholic. I tell my religious friends, and you're a friend, so I'm going to tell you
Hmm.
that I think one of the delusions of religion is that they take the things that evolution taught us anyway and they credit religion. Like Jesus said, you should be kind to people. Well, guess what? Long before Jesus showed up, evolution told you the same thing, or you were dead.
Hmm.
Jesus says share and be merciful. Well, let me tell you something. In hunter-gatherer society, of which 98% of entire human existence was spent in that, that's how we were
Yeah.
shaped.
Yeah.
If you didn't do those things, you were dead. So, of course, when Jesus shows up and states the obvious, everybody says a prophet. Okay, I'm being sarcastic and stupid
Sure.
here. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
okay. I
So,
do. I
go
do.
there. Talk
Yeah.
about
Go there.
evolution.
Yeah. Evolution. Well, I don't know what to say about the evolutionary point. I mean, first of all, you're 100% right. If the evolutionary drive is what it is, we're going to be lonely and anxious and like completely sick if we just turn it off. But there's something about this moment. I mean, if you can be having zero point 0.8 babies per woman, in South Korea, and I think somebody's estimating now that um, China might be below one, the official numbers. I mean, if you can be there, does that mean evolution is wrong or that we're just ignoring? Like, I mean, ultimately, like if we can ignore evolution, how much of a drive is it? I'm not, I'm not pushing back ultimately, but it's definitely a deep challenge to the question of our existence as persons to be able to shut that off. I mean, I don't know what to say.
Well, it's a
Um,
deep challenge in more areas than just procreation.
Absolutely.
Putting
Absolutely.
career ahead of relationships, say.
But but I mean, are you right that the decline in self-reported happiness in women kind of occurs when reproduction starts to go below replacement? Yes, 100%. And it's the one thing that the people tracking those numbers don't want to look at.
Yeah.
They don't want to look at that. So one thing that came out of this research, I started to
Well, nor do they want to look at where kids actually do best.
no, they don't want to look at where kids actually do best, and they don't want to look at where we're happiest. I mean, so there's this paper which I cite in the book, which I think is a great paper. Everybody should look at it, and it's really brief. It shows up to say one thing. These are two economists at the University of Michigan, Justin Wolfers and Betsy Stevenson, and they said, it's a real paradox if you look at all of the self-reported happiness data for the last 40 years. It looks like the moment of the kind of, 1960s, 1970s women's movement is the moment when women's self-reported happiness kind of starts to go downhill. And they say this is a big paradox because the women's movement made things better for women, right? And they don't answer their own
Yeah.
question.
But of course,
But
I'm sympathetic to that
yeah,
1970s women's movement that said, to hell with
yeah,
this business, because of course the village in America was already broken.
agreed,
We
agreed,
went to college, then we moved to this little thing, and
agreed,
then there's this tiny little nuclear family, and she's supposed to stay home and vacuum and make a cake for that night. Well, fuck
agreed.
that. This isn't hunter
No,
gathering,
that's
all living
exactly
together in a village. It's all
agreed. And
bullshit.
I think a lot of the, Camille Paglia talks about this. And I mean, they kind of say, well, look, what we were interested in wasn't the thing we have now. What we're interested in was rejecting that crazy stuff.
Yeah.
The idea that women are like in these boxes, Leah in the book, she says something like, it's completely unnatural to put a new mother, lock her in a box with an infant and then just kind of walk away. Like
And
that's
then she's supposed to be
completely,
happy because she has
she's
cake
supposed to be
mixes and a
happy.
dishwasher.
Of course she's postpartum depressed, right? I mean, of course she is. That's completely unnatural.
Yeah.
So yeah, that all has to be challenged. And I'm with you. I'm sympathetic that those were things to rebel against. Those were correct things to rebel against. So I don't know. I don't know what it says about evolution, but I definitely think what we're doing today is fundamentally unnatural in a way that doesn't make any sense. You couldn't imagine any other species, like think about this for 1 second, right? It doesn't make any kind of sense. So I do think we have to look at our
Well,
patterns of
pandas do it, and they're
productive.
only kept alive by artificial insemination in zoos if the supply of the
Who
one
who
food
is?
they'll now eat
Yeah.
shows up. And
No,
it's
no,
not
that's right.
working out well for them.
No, but we have to look at our reproductive patterns. We are reproductive animals. And so if you're kind of looking for sources of malaise and you're not looking at reproductive patterns, I think you've got to be barking up the wrong tree.
You know, it's interesting. My producer just sent me something that I like to say that you brought up Camille Paglia, and I thought she said it, and I told him he did, but then I turned out I said it, and I just
Ah,
written it as a note in her book, Glittering Images, and that is you can only deconstruct a culture once.
oh,
And
yeah.
that's something I came up with having read her book called Glittering Images on the deconstruction of art and the big art
Mhm.
gallery scenes and so forth. My point being
Yeah.
that I think a weird narrative's going on, and I'd really like your opinion on this. It seems to me that a lot of the pushback against family, whether it's through the discoveries of the sexual revolution or whatever it may be, or certain kind of faux feminism out of the 1970s that was really rebelling against women locked in a little apartment, little
Hmm.
house with a dishwasher,
Hmm.
has to do with a kind of an elite educated version of pushing back against what they regard as old religious beliefs in Christianity, whereas actually I think they're pushing back against evolution a lot of times. And
Hmm.
essentially, they're just making the rubble bounce now when it comes to pushing back against Christianity. You know, with Trump, for a
Hmm.
start,
Hmm.
evangelicals have become part of a cult now, a presidential cult, following this one guy. They're not the evangelicals I grew up with. They're
Hmm.
basically into this hard-assed,
Yeah.
MAGA Republican shit, whatever that is. And then on the other hand, when it comes to this culture revolution and the sexual revolution, the arguments are kind of settled there in the elite
Yeah.
institutions. So,
Yeah.
actually, I think we've got to say, forget religion for a minute. We're
Hmm.
not talking about virginity until marriage or the
Hmm.
Saudi version of women. We're talking about stuff that predates religion,
Hmm.
how
Hmm.
human development. And I think that's one of the
Yeah.
things, tennis
Yes.
children, that you tap
Yeah.
into in the
Yeah.
sense that you're talking to real women who are trying to live a
Hmm.
life. Talk a little bit about the
Yeah.
problems they face because you're so honest in the book with
Yeah.
these women who have more children and the lives and the sacrifice necessary. Talk a little bit about that sort of altruistic um, sacrifice of easy choices and being able to do whatever you want every day, and then also counterbalanced by how crazily educated and successful these women are.
Okay. I'm going to write that down. But your point about before religion, I just wanted to concur. One of the women said something like underneath religion,
Mhm.
and I really like that term, and I think she kind of meant it was something that seemed to her prior. Um, and because I found such similar expressions uh, about purpose across the women in my book who have all different faiths, um, right? All different faiths, all different traditions, different preaching. I did feel that I was trying to express something that was, if not prior, then underneath or basic, maybe basic human in a sense, and sort of accessible to people regardless of creed. So I just want to agree with you and kind of highlight that. So you said talk about some of the sacrifices. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, people just if you talk to a bunch of moms who have a lot of kids who are little at the moment, they're going to talk about sleeplessness. They're going to talk about giving up sleep for lots of years. I did the math. I mean, some of them with big families, probably had infants for 20 plus years in their lives. Hardly any of us can imagine that. I use the analogy of like it's like being in boot camp every year for 20 years or something like that. That's a crazy way to live, right? That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, physical challenges, pregnancy isn't always easy for everybody. Um, Giving up your hobbies, like there's things that you think, well, I'd really like to do that. I mean, one woman who's a musician and a recording artist, and she just said, well, I have to put it on the back burner, and it's not on the back burner forever, but you just have to rotate priorities. What are some other things? I mean, a lot of them, I mean, now you asked about how educated they were. I'll move to that. A lot of them talked about, how they'd be better at their chosen profession if they didn't have so many children.
Mhm.
One woman talked about having to move off the tenure track and being at peace with that. Another woman who had tenure, she talked about, well, don't have a published book. She said, will I have a published book? She said, well, that's not me, and I'm okay with that. Would I have a published book if I didn't have kids? She says, well, for sure I would. And then she says, but it's not what I value. What I value is people. People matter. So, so yeah, they did speak about all manner of things, ranging from, you know, promotions at work to just being more excellent at your work to giving up hobbies, time, vacations, like certainly certain financial things. And I just also want to stress that although the women in my book are all well educated, they really did hail from all varieties of
Sure.
socioeconomic status. Some women were living paycheck to paycheck, and some were super, super wealthy, super zips. So they all talked about giving stuff up, right? So that wasn't
Sure.
just sort of, yeah, it wasn't that. And so, yeah, ranging from, you know, just with college degrees to JDs, MDs, PhDs,
Mhm.
scholars. Some people have challenged me, said, well, you know, are you trying to say that that's the only good way to be educated as a woman is to, and of course, that's not what I'm interested in saying. But because what we're seeing with fewer and fewer births happening around the world, and now really in a kind of crisis, the tension really seems to be with the more education women get, the fewer children are born on average. So that was the tension I wanted to explore. That's why when, and of course I
Well,
have
what's
limited
interesting
resources.
is you're the
Yeah.
exception that proves the rule because you're talking to educated women
Yeah.
and you're educated and you're a university professor. You've had all these
Yeah.
kids. So obviously those
Yeah.
things are not mutually exclusive.
They're not mutually
Only when
exclusive.
you have a reverse set of priorities are they
That's
mutually.
right.
Talk
That's
about
right.
that a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
is
I mean,
possible
so
because you've done it.
it's possible. Yeah, obviously it's possible. And I mean, you know, no one's going to deny. So, I mean, even in my own sample, some of the women are working full time and some of them are not. And so the
Yeah,
ones who are working full time, they have fewer children than the ones who stayed home full time. So there's still going to be that trade-off. But I think the way it seemed to me, the best way I could describe it was that the women in my sample, they they prioritize children and they fit their career around children and
sure,
family. Where, you know, in contrast with maybe prioritizing a certain career path or certain like life script and then fitting children in as they work.
sure.
And I'm like thinking about you as a young man, welcoming your first baby when you were what, 17 or 18?
12. No, okay. I
What a
might as
man.
well have been 6.
Yes, what a man. I know, right? When you're
When you're
much older,
17, I mean, I can't
you,
even
you
remember,
you look at yourself as a 17-year-old or a 23-year-old, like I was totally a kid, right? Um, but I think I would want to contrast like something that seems very pernicious about modernity, at least as we handle children, is this idea that there's kind of a right time to have a child.
Yeah,
And you welcomed your first child at exactly what would everybody would say is not the right time to have a child.
right.
And the idea sort of says like time has got this characteristic, or the moment has a characteristic, and it's the right moment for the child. The child, in a sense, is this passive entity. The child is a passive entity. It's like you know, it's like receiving a package in the mail, or it's like something that falls from the sky. What I think is more correct is that the child changes the world, and it changes you, changes your world, right?
Mhm.
So it's incorrect to think of the child as this passive, like right, like it's like a millstone around your neck. It's something
Yeah.
that, you know, you're either ready for this or you're not ready for this. But in fact, the child makes you ready.
Yeah. And I think the same thing, by the way, applies to marriage
Yeah,
relationships.
that's right.
People ask me, how do you know who to marry? I said, you never do because the person you marry is going to change because they're married.
That's right. That's
This is
exactly
why
right.
living together without a commitment doesn't actually tell you what you need to know about being married with a commitment. Because
Right.
it's like, how do you become a parent? You become a parent by becoming
By
a parent,
being a parent. Exactly. And I
period.
don't I don't know a great way to describe that, but that is the difference between somebody hands you a car or a house when you're 17 and says, now take care of this. Like
Right.
I don't, it's not going to work the same way, but
By
the,
the way, just parenthetically speaking about successful women, this is a little brag here.
yeah.
That daughter of mine, Jessica, is the CEO of an investment company in New York
Mm,
City.
mm,
And she dropped out of NYU and married at 22 and went off
wow.
and had her kids in Finland before she
Interesting.
started her high-powered career. And she did it
Interesting.
in that order. So I
Yeah.
just want to say that in my
No,
own family, my daughter did, and nobody told her to do that. I wasn't saying, well, Jessica, I got married young. You should do this.
right.
I was horrified. It's
No.
like she's in NYU. She's
Yeah.
doing, finished her university education at the
Hmm.
University of
Hmm.
Finland, went on and did this incredible thing. But
Right.
she wrote me an email, and this is what I'm getting to besides
Uh-huh.
just bragging. saying, I know you think a lot about relationships. And Dad, one thing I've noticed when I'm in boardrooms, often I'm the only woman in the room with especially British bankers where she raises a lot of money and
Hmm.
they don't know how to handle women. And one thing I've noticed is when I talk to younger women who say, how did you do this?
Hmm.
Wind up as the CEO of a company like this. Um, she says, because I was a mother.
Hmm.
Everything I know about management, everything I know about time, everything, all my own maturity comes from that.
Right.
I haven't learned anything from business. I
Interesting.
learned being a mom
Yeah.
first, came to business with a total view of how life should be, which gave me a leg up on all the other women I was working with
I,
because I had done this first. And she
yeah.
wrote that to me in an email, which
Mm.
I'm quoting in something I'm writing anyway. Just
Yeah.
like enjoy that story.
That's a great story. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to that. There's a really lovely piece that you're reminding me of written by a, an editor and a journalist, Rachel Liu,
Hmm.
in a kind of contemporary magazine of kind of feminism. I think it's called Sex Realism Feminism, Sex Realist Feminism. Anyway, I'll send you a link later. But she really talks about this. She talks about women after having their children, what they can bring to the workforce and that, you know, could be recognized by people and probably increasingly is. Um, yeah, so I think that I mean that kind of covers it. I mean, this idea that basically the we as as persons, we're not immune from change and that persons change us, right? The persons change. So the child changes you, the spouse changes you. Um, Earlier when you were talking, I was thinking about this phrase that some of the women talked about this idea that kind of as you go through this transformation, that I think that was your word, this transformation, you
Hmm.
discover like climbing Mount Everest, you discover you're changing. It's not that you're not conquering the mountain, but you're changing. A lot of the women use this language of like um, initially the pull to go back to normal. Like
Hmm.
so you start something hard, and I think marriage is like this too. Initially, you think I remember thinking this actually. I remember thinking this about both my first child and about my marriage. Like we'll get to this point when I'll feel normal again. Like,
Hmm.
I don't feel like myself. I feel like a person who's pretending to be married, right? And someday, you know, maybe I'll go back to normal, or I don't know how this is going to end, but I don't feel normal. And I remember when my first baby was born, I remember so much thinking, well, I'm not me anymore. Like my body's changed. I don't feel like myself.
Hmm.
My marriage won't be the same again. We won't enjoy these things or those things. And for a while, it feels like you just are kind of play acting at a thing. What do they say now? They say it's as LARPing, it's live action role playing, right?
Hmm.
But actually, I think that's exactly like whatever it is you're going to do, it's not something you've done before. Um, People talk about this. I don't know. James Clear talks about this. See people who talk about habits, and we might want to go there. I mean, this is like a big piece of this transformation.
Hmm.
The initially you're not a runner. You're just somebody who wants to run, and you know you
Yeah.
put the sneakers out. And you start telling yourself, "I'm a runner," so you do things that run. And there's something about this, but I do think we're lacking the in relation to marriage, right? And in relation to children, like we have a word. There are runners. Like I'm not a runner. There are runners.
Right.
There are walkers. There are people. There are hikers. What is the equivalent for people who are like experts at being a husband? Like
Hmm.
you're Jeannie's husband, and like you've been practiced at that for 50
Right.
years. That's incredible. So when you think about what's your identity, you look in the mirror, what am I good at? Right? Like first and foremost, there's a habit related to being a great partner in life.
Hmm.
And it involves all these things. And when you first put it on, it feels awkward. Like I could never feel normal being her partner
Well, not
every
only does it not feel
day.
normal,
Yeah.
I'm not pushing you to go here, but in terms
Yeah.
of my story,
Yeah.
you can be horrible at it.
You can be horrible.
I
It's
was
so
horrible at it.
true. Oh, I was
You
a
know,
terrible wife.
and I, again, sorry about the language, but I was raised
No.
by evangelical fundamentalists. Men were in charge. They were threw their
Yeah.
weight around. It was very
Yeah.
patriarchal. And sometimes, and not facetiously, I say, well,
Hmm.
from birth, I was more or less groomed to be, what I guess now I look back on as an asshole by divine right.
Yeah.
Because not only were you an
Yeah.
asshole, but God wanted you to be one. You're
Right.
supposed to boss your wife around and yell at men people and get your way. It took me years to get through
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And so basically, if people say, how did what's your marriage built on?
Yeah.
My marriage is built on the fact Jeannie gave me many second chances.
Hmm.
And basically, the life itself sorted me out
Yeah.
because you can either go all the way down that rabbit hole of assholeness and just
Yeah.
become that's it,
Right.
and you're just an asshole, or you can look in the mirror one day and say, what the hell am I trying to do here?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you begin to change, and maybe you
Right.
get some therapy like I did, and maybe you do some other things, and
Hmm.
eventually you look back and you're just saying the miracle here is not that we stayed married. The miracle here is that Jeannie stuck with the program. And
Yeah.
so,
Right.
when I get up and I do the cooking and the grocery shopping and childcare and do the dishes and all this stuff supposedly good husbands are supposed to do, and some
Hmm.
young woman looks enviously at Jeannie, says, wow, my husband doesn't do any of that. Jeannie can come back and say, well, this asshole, it took him 20 years to
Yeah.
figure this out. And thank God, because now we've been together 54 years and the
Right.
last 30 have been pretty good,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and that's the real journey that nobody
Yeah.
wants to talk about. It's
That's
all
so
like
right.
instant. Me, I've got to have this all sorted out. I don't understand how anybody
Right.
stays married going in with that
No,
mentality.
no, you can't. You're reminding me of Michael Novak was a good friend of mine, and he used to say to people, well, the secret to marriage is to know that the first 60 years are the hardest ones.
Yeah. I
Like
love
after
that.
that, it's easy. And that's, I mean, there's a lot
But
of
the
truth.
thing is, see, again, I just
Yeah.
want to be fair here. People would single that out.
Yeah,
But of course, that's true for careers. I
it
mean,
is true for
have you ever talked to a concert pianist? The
right.
first 30 years are
Mm,
while you're learning, and
yeah,
eventually, somewhere between the ages of 40 and 70, you
yeah,
finally get it together.
right,
I mean, I
right.
I cry sometimes when I see great art because I know what went into the practice hours you're not
Yeah,
watching.
yeah,
And I think it's the same with relationships. People see people like Jeannie and me as a finished product.
yeah,
They weren't there for the
right,
sausage making.
right,
They didn't see what went in. And they say, well, then marriage is something I don't want to do. Well, I have news for you. Then you're
right.
never going to do a career well either.
Hmm.
You're never going to do any relationship well because if you think
Right.
you know shit now and you're
Yeah,
23 about being whatever, look what happened to Boeing. The old
exactly.
engineers who were into quality got let go by these new
Hmm.
hotshots who moved the thing to Chicago, and now doors fall off their airplanes
Right, right.
because the guys that
Exactly.
had paid the price
Hmm.
actually knew shit were gone.
Yeah.
And they didn't bring that acumen to the table when they were 23.
No.
These were the seasoned old
Yeah.
hands that knew something.
Yeah.
Well, we see that in business.
Yeah.
We don't understand about relationships and parenthood. And
Right.
I often feel my grandchildren owe a huge debt of thanks to my children because
Hmm.
I learned on my children. And
Yeah.
so when my grandchildren think Ba, they call me Ba, is good at this. Ba's
Yeah.
good at this because he
Hmm.
wasn't so good at raising children and he knows
Yeah.
what those regrets are and what he could have done better.
Right.
I just don't think people get that realistic view.
No. And sadly, I mean, as regards motherhood, a lot of the women talked about this, and I mean, I definitely felt this. Um, if people are having one or two kids, they never get to the point where they're good at it.
Yeah,
Because there's a skill there. I mean, it's not just
yeah,
binary. Like I've given birth to, like you could be a terrible mother at the beginning. Most of us really are terrible mothers.
yeah,
But man, there is nothing like, when you come home with the fourth or the fifth and you're kind of like, I'm just enjoying this. Like I've learned all the hard parts. This is really,
yeah,
and then you realize that actually there's this big secret, which like when you've gotten the hard parts mastered and you just enjoy it, you're a way better mother. Because you
yeah,
know what you're doing? You're just spending all your time enjoying that other person and they feel enjoyed.
yeah,
And I think that our younger children, those of us blessed with large families, our younger children, they have a better experience of growing up because they've got not like stressed, inexperienced, kind of weird parents. That's what turns oldest children into oldest children, right? Like my
yeah,
oldest son is this like super type A kid, and that's great, and he's whoever he is and he'll work out his issues. But I wasn't focused solely on enjoying him. I was trying to figure out what the hell I was doing, right?
yeah,
Now, my youngest couple of kids, I mean, man, it's just enjoyment, right? Like every second of every day, it's just like I want to enjoy this longer
yeah, because
because
you're
I don't
not
have
scared
anything left
anymore.
to learn. I mean,
Yeah.
not like I have nothing left to learn, but it's like the hard things to learn, I know how to do those. And
Hmm.
they don't take anything away from anymore.
Hmm.
And so, right, you do wish that you could somehow donate that view to other people because it's like, man, if you could just get there, you would just It's a totally different experience.
And one thing I would just add to that, and
Yeah.
then we need to wrap this up, but we have to
Yeah.
do about 10 more of these. So I think we'll just make it. Ernie, we're going to do this once a week now.
Great.
Cancel all the other guests. We found the one that has something to say. Um, but my view is that there is a little bit of a shortcut on that. I'm not disagreeing with you, and it's called
Yeah.
intergenerational connection.
Right. Oh, yes.
Because my grandchildren are not going to start from zero. They
That's
know
right.
what a loving male looks
Yeah.
like for a start, because he
Yeah.
cooks for them after school every
Yeah.
day. So they
Yeah.
know what that relationship to be. It's not a loud, bossy guy telling you what to do. He's doing it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he shows you how to do it.
Yeah.
And he doesn't boss you. He just does it in front of you and lets you participate. So,
Yeah.
and I think the same goes for mothers.
Mm-hmm.
Jeannie was a young mom,
Mm-hmm.
but we were living in the basement, and my kids had this too harsh, stupid young father, me, but they could
Yep.
escape upstairs and be with my mom, who was
Yeah.
relaxed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so they were, and then Jeannie could go there and look, and then I could be a little bit shamed into being a
Yeah.
little more mellow. So I
Yeah.
think when you wait to have a baby till you're 40,
Yeah.
and then your grandparents are all aged or dead because you've
Right.
waited so long, you
Yeah.
remove the intergenerational learning thing. So now you really are the scared, lonely mother with no
Yeah.
village and
Yeah.
nobody to show you anything.
Yeah. No, this is 1,000% correct. Yeah. I mean, my younger sisters, I mean, I think their first year was a lot better because I could go and see them and share things with them. I didn't have an older sister to do that for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're very right about that. Or, you talked about your daughter. My third son got married this past summer and he was 19. So not as ridiculously young as you were, but he was 19. And he grew up holding my babies, right? Because he's my
Right.
third. And so he grew up holding my babies. And so he said to me, "Well, Mom, why would Mary and I want to wait? We don't want to wait. We want to have a baby right away. Because why? Because there's nothing like it.
Well,
There's nothing like."
interestingly enough, I'll tell you a little story, and
Yeah.
then we really
Tell
do
me.
have to wrap this
Go
up.
ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
But when my son came back from combat in Afghanistan,
Hmm.
and he told me he wanted to get married, not because he was imitating me,
Sure.
he said, I know one thing that a lot of my contemporaries don't. Life is really short,
Hmm.
because he had friends
Yeah.
killed. And he says, and I
Yeah.
want children. And so basically, he found a young woman who wanted babies now,
Hmm.
because he said, I'm not marrying someone that's going to delay all the way down. And by the way, she has a
Yeah.
brilliant career and her
Yeah.
kids, because she again put it in the other thing. And then we were
Yeah.
across the street.
Hmm.
When one of the books I like a lot is The Old Way, that I talked about, by Elizabeth Marshall Thomas. And one of the things with the hunter-gatherers there, and we
Hmm.
can end on this note in terms of teaching
Yeah.
the youth not to be as afraid. The young people always had a saying that she lived with them off and on for a year. When they didn't know something, here was their answer.
Mm.
The old people haven't told us yet.
Mm. Hmm.
That's the
Interesting.
deal.
Interesting.
And our old people are all locked away,
Yeah.
waiting to having children so long they're not a factor. Now we are caregivers of our
Yeah.
Alzheimer's
These
mom.
ridiculous retirement communities. I mean, to get me started on this. Like, I hate this whole
Me
phenomenon.
too.
It's awful. Just
Yeah.
hope my own kids, one of them will have me when I get older. Um, yeah, we build these little villages for people to live in. It's
Yeah,
terrible.
it's horrible.
Yeah.
In any case, Hannah
Yeah.
and her children. So I just wanted to also say, if you'll
Mhm.
allow us, I would like to make Hannah's Children, The Women Quietly Defying the Birth Dearth by Catherine Ruth Pakaluk. We have a book club called It Has to Be Read, and we want to make this
Mhm.
part of our book club, which would be in June.
Mhm.
This will be our June selection, and we'll have you back at least in June
Okay.
to talk about it.
Great. Yeah.
And it becomes a book club thing, and then people react to it, and we put it on all our media and posts.
Great.
And we're going to, of course, wherever this goes, we'll have links to you and to the book. And I just think, as I said at the beginning of the introduction here, that you are a genuinely countercultural figure. I come from the 60s, and I know what genuine counterculture looks like, and you're it. It's not this sort of polished
Mm.
influencer crap,
Mhm.
basically the whole thing. It is,
Yeah.
you're genuinely countercultural, which means that when you read your book, agree, disagree, hate it, or love it, you will
Mhm.
never be the same, because you've looked through a window at a view you never knew was there.
Mhm.
And that's what Hannah's and her children gives you.
Mhm.
So you're a good person.
Thanks. Thanks so much. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed talking with you, and you're I'd like to get up to Boston as soon as I can.
Well, come see us.
I will.
If I talk too much in this for people who are used to listening to my podcast, it's because I'm so excited to talk to Catherine after reading her book that I'm kind of bubbly here, a little bit starstruck. This book really
Mm,
got to me,
mm,
and that's why I talk too much because
mm.
I'm like I had my half a cup of pre-interview coffee, and it's like I
Yeah.
actually had 3 mugs. I'm totally caffeinated out with a half a cup because that's what talking to you did.
Well, now I'm going to just blush. So that's lovely.
Okay,
I'm
well,
going to
stay in
blush out.
touch and keep Ernie and me posted on what you're doing with the book and
I will.
where it's reviewed and where you appear
Mhm.
because we want to follow all this and we're going to make it part of our shtick.
Great. I will absolutely. And if you think of anybody I should talk to, I will talk to anybody and I'll follow up all the
We
leads.
will.
Yeah.
And
Thank
thanks,
you.
by the way, for putting me in touch with Brad Wilcox because I'm
Oh, good.
interviewing him next week on his book Get Married.
Great. Great. I hope you enjoy that.
And by the way, I was
Mhm.
emailing him and not getting a response. And then I emailed you, said, I'm trying to get in touch with Brad. And 12 minutes later, he emailed me. So it's like, you're a very powerful woman. This is like talking to the Godfather.
I
And
hope
by the way,
so.
we need Jean Twenge,
Oh, yeah.
who's
Uh,
written this book called Generations. So
yes.
do your magic for us. Write to her and tell her to be on my
Okay.
podcast.
I'll do my best. I'd like to meet her too. So maybe I know somebody who knows her.
Well, or maybe the three of us should talk.
That'd be great. That would,
Why don't you try to get in touch with Jean
I
through
will.
mutual friends like your
Okay.
buddies who write things
Yeah.
about you and just say, we're trying to get to doing Jean Twenge. And I can never say her name. Is that right? Twenge? Twenge? Twings?
I don't know.
It's
I've only read it. I've never
Twenge.
heard it said. I just read it.
Well, her
So
new book is Generations, and before that was
generations.
iGen,
Yeah.
and I've read both and I've quoted
Hmm.
both. We're trying to
Okay.
get in touch with Jean. Anybody out there know Jean, please tell Jean Twenge that I
Okay.
want to interview her, and you should co-interview her with me because I
Good.
think both we'd get good questions between the two
Great.
of us about
Great.
generational change. All
Absolutely.
right,
Well,
pal.
yeah, to be
Till next
continued,
time.
right? Till next time. Thank
Tutto
you so
bene.
much.
Bye.
Bye.